Hello and welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Gibson, and I am an author, counselor, and the founder of the Personal Development School. Here on this channel, I create daily video content for anybody who didn't have healthy relationship modeling growing up. Perhaps one of your parents wasn't around, or you constantly walked on eggshells as a child, or just didn't see healthy, thriving relationships, or even maybe you're coming out of some sort of traumatic relationship or just painful heartbreak more recently. And so on this channel, we cover everything about how to thrive in relationships by deeply understanding them and how healthy love is supposed to work without manipulation and games. So if you want to get daily free content all about these topics, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell below. And this will make sure that you don't miss any of our content, or as we maybe do a once a month webinar on this channel, that you won't miss out on that either. Now, today we're going to talk a lot about the differences between CPTSD and fearful avoidant attachment style. And by the end of this video, I think you'll be able to really look at these concepts differently and also very clearly. So my hope for you in this video is that if you're not sure whether you have CPTSD or fearful avoidant attachment style, or perhaps both, not only will you understand each of these concepts really intricately, but you'll also be able to map out where you have certain things related to CPTSD or where you have certain things related to FA attachment style, because we're going to really go through all the different similarities and differences together. So you can sort of keep track of these as we go and map out like which points are lining up for you and sort of check the boxes under each of those categories to see where you might be. Of course, this is not an official diagnosis. It's just an educational video, but it will help you gain some insight into next steps that you could potentially take on your personal healing journey. So first and foremost, if you're not already familiar, PTSD versus CPTSD, PTSD generally tends to be post-traumatic stress disorder that is because of one or a few more singular isolated events. So let's just say, for example, somebody could have PTSD after a severe car accident, right? It could be sort of this singular isolated event. Whereas complex post-traumatic stress disorder tends to have a lot to do with a series of cumulative events that are traumatic over time. A lot of the time when we talk CPTSD, we're talking lower level trauma. So let's just, for the sake of the analogy, maybe a severe car accident is like an 8 or a 9 or a 10 out of 10 trauma that happens at one isolated time. Whereas CPTSD, you may have lower level traumas, but of course, there can also be more severe trauma as well. But a very typical example would be having lower level traumas consistently across time. So let's say, for example, you grew up in a home that was very unsafe. Maybe there was a tremendous amount of chaos. Maybe there was a lot of confusion or lying or deceit. You may have these sort of 4 out of 10 level traumas, 5 out of 10 level traumas that your system cannot properly process and understand, but they exist consistently across time. And they may happen so frequently, on a almost daily or weekly basis, that it really skews your view of healthy relationships, healthy connection, and can have a deep impact on the relationship to yourself and how you regulate as well. So that would be more of a CPTSD type of scenario. Now, of course, that can also increase in severity, and it can be somebody on the more severe end of the spectrum that is exposed to physical abuse, sexual abuse, things like that on an ongoing basis. And then we will tend to have more severe CPTSD. And we can also have isolated PTSD events, and they can often go hand in hand. So when it comes to CPTSD, I just want to start off by saying a lot of individuals with fearful avoidant attachment style also have CPTSD. Do all of them? No. Do a lot of them? Yes, it's quite common. So some of the first dynamics that we'll see in regards to CPTSD is we'll see a lot of emotional dysregulation in individuals with CPTSD. Now, this can create a lot of like fluctuating emotions. And this is because when we go through chronic forms of trauma, our subconscious mind stores everything. Now, it consolidates memories over time, but it also stores them. So, if we imagine that your subconscious mind is like a giant warehouse full of boxes, if you have a lot of experiences with like deceit growing up, or with verbal abuse, or with feeling unsafe, you can imagine that your subconscious mind is just having to create bigger and bigger boxes full of these types of experiences. And your subconscious mind also stores all the emotion attached to these experiences and memories. So over time in your warehouse, you've got a whole big section full of deceit, right? And what can happen, and in this specific example, is we make meaning out of that as we try to process our experiences but don't know how. And what happens is we end up making meaning in the form of core wounds. So, a core wound attached to a lot of deceit growing up may be something along the lines of, I will always be betrayed. And we keep expecting betrayal and we become more suspicious as a result of having seen a lot of betrayal growing up. Another version of this could be if you constantly feel like you have to walk on eggshells as a child, then you may go, okay, I am unsafe. I don't really feel safe and rooted and grounded. And so if you have a lot of storage in your subconscious warehouse full of boxes around a lack of safety, then you may also have that core wound. I am unsafe. I will always be unsafe. Now, you may not consciously think of this, but subconsciously you are storing this information. And whatever is subconsciously stored also tends to get reprojected. Meaning, if you also have the experience, let's say, of feeling abandoned or left alone and sort of not supported or helpless, you may, with all those boxes, have the core wounds of I will be abandoned, I'll be alone, I am helpless. And the moment that you see a change in a pattern in your adult life many years later, you go, oh my gosh, I'm about to be abandoned. I'm about to be betrayed. I'm about to be unsafe. And your subconscious mind reprojects out that experience. It essentially is like your conscious mind communicates with your subconscious mind and says, what boxes of information do we have? What filing cabinets in our warehouse do we have here? And you may see that, your subconscious mind opens all these filing cabinets full of information, and all of these wounds and emotions flood to the surface. So, this will lead to a lot more emotional dysregulation. This is something that is more common with fearful avoidant attachment styles as a whole, but also is very specific to CPTSD. So, this is something that they will both share. Number two, we will tend to see that there can be a lot of distorted self perception with somebody who has CPTSD. Now, distorted self perception can be, a lot of really profound feelings um, about oneself that are negative. Okay. Now, I want to be really clear here because this is easy to get mixed up. Sometimes people will think of distorted self perception as having a lack of self identity. Lack of self identity tends to be very specific to individuals with BPD. Okay. Distorted self perception tends to be more common in individuals with CPTSD. What is the difference? A lack of self identity is like we have this chronic feeling of emptiness. We don't know who we are. We kind of take on the identity and, views and opinions and perceptions of people around us very quickly and easily because we don't have a strong sense of self. And this is very common with BPD specifically. Distorted self perception tends to be that we see ourselves as more exclusively negative. So we may think of ourselves as being not good enough or being not worthy of love, or we may think of ourselves as being unlovable in some way or bad, because we have a chronic history of trauma, perhaps where we were guilted and shamed more frequently. Now, distorted self-perception is still a form of self-perception and identity. We can actually have quite a strong self-identity but still have it be slightly distortive and skew towards seeing ourselves through a more negative lens. So those things can go hand in hand, but they tend to be quite different. With CPTSD, we will tend to see this distorted self-perception as being something that's more negative. And fearful avoidants also tend to share this, and this can go hand in hand with fearful avoidant attachment style because fearful avoidants have a lot of those core wounds. They have core wounds around being abandoned, alone, trapped, helpless, powerless, unsafe, bad, not good enough, unworthy, about to be betrayed all the time. So the more core wounds we have, the more we're going to see ourselves and others through more of a negative light. But that can be a very separate discussion, though nuanced, from somebody who has a very strong lacking of sense of self. Okay. So, number three, we will also tend to see more persistent feelings of fear and anxiety in somebody with CPTSD. And what this represents is that if we are constantly growing up in a household, let's just say as an example, or even if this is out of a past relationship, because a lot of people can have CPTSD coming out of a narcissistic relationship with a romantic partner, because it dysregulates your nervous system so much. If you're constantly walking on eggshells, fearing having to change yourself, getting shamed, criticized. There can just be this like chronic worry and anxiety. And so what will happen a lot is these chronic feelings of fear and anxiety put you in a chronic state, or at least more frequent state of sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight mode. You will see that both fearful avoidant attachment styles and individuals with CPTSD tend to share being stuck in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. Okay. Now, fearful avoidant attachment styles, they may not realize as much that they are in this space because they tend to cope very quickly and often quite effectively compared to somebody who might have more severe CPTSD. Again, it can be a shared similarity of both, but in this case specifically, you may see these things existing along a continuum. So, for example, you might see a fearful avoidant who is pretty anxious or dysregulated, like they're more in fight or flight mode, but they might be good at adapting quickly, being more people pleasing. And they may tend to just be really hyper vigilant as a coping mechanism, where they can kind of like see 10 steps ahead, figure out what to do. Whereas you may see somebody with CPTSD have these really strong, exaggerated feelings, and they're not exaggerated because they're not real. The feelings are just greater than perhaps a typical fearful avoidant in somebody with CPTSD. So they might have more extreme feelings of anxiety, but also fear. Fearful avoidants are less likely to feel fear all the time. They are more likely to feel feelings like frustration, anger, hurt, and low level anxiety. Whereas I've often found individuals with CPTSD have chronic feelings of like fear, anxiety, and helplessness, and may often feel like they're kind of stuck in a freeze mode a lot of the time, where they're unable to take action towards goals or initiatives that they want to, and they can feel kind of stuck or frozen more often. But again, fearful avoidance and individuals with CPTSD may share these qualities, but you will see those nuanced differences in terms of the emotions they tend to both experience. The next one we have here, number 4, is that we may see difficulty in terms of relationships with both. Okay. Individuals with CPTSD and fearful avoidant attachment style alike tend to have trust issues, abandonment issues, and often difficulty forming deeper and more secure attachment based relationships because they're both afraid of being vulnerable. Often vulnerability, when you were vulnerable to somebody and they hurt you, we then very easily fuse together at a subconscious level the association between vulnerability, weakness, and helplessness. Whereas the reality for securely attached people is that vulnerability does not mean weakness and helplessness. Vulnerability can be a chosen way of operating when in a secure relationship with somebody that you took the time to vet to see if it was a good fit. And so when you're doing that, vulnerability becomes a healthy initiative in a relationship. But when your whole history and all of your subconscious filing cabinets at that level of mind say, hey, vulnerability for us has always made us feel weak or helpless or abandoned or betrayed, then we are more likely to see vulnerability through that lens. And it can actually impact stunted growth in our relationships where we end up not wanting to open ourselves up more. But one thing you should know is that a necessity in order to move past the power struggle stage of relationships is to have healthy vulnerability with the right people who we have intentionally vetted, right? We've taken the time to see, like, do they have healthy morals? Do our needs line up? Are we a good fit for each other? Do they know how to talk through things? And are they a supportive person in a relationship, right? So when we do that vetting, we can establish vulnerability in a healthy way with a healthy person, and that's good. But when we don't vet properly, because we're kind of in this triggered state a lot of the time, or we may have a subconscious comfort zone around being attracted to the wrong people, because oftentimes, like, our subconscious associations for love actually dictate our output in terms of what we'll be attracted to in other people in our adult lives. When we don't take the time to unpack that, or we haven't had the tools or resources for subconscious reprogramming, then we can get stuck in having these different trust issues, fear of abandonment, and of course, this will create difficulty in relationships. Number 5, dissociation. So this is one of the big differences. So individuals with FA attachment style may experience mild feelings of dissociation sometimes. And really, that will be mild in the sense of disconnection from their feelings, sometimes disconnection from how feelings feel in their body, sometimes not knowing what they feel, maybe an overarching sort of sense of numbness. But Somebody with CPTSD will experience more severe forms of dissociation and often more chronic forms of dissociation, where we might see like, you know, it- a total disconnection from how traumatic events were felt or experienced in our past, in our memory, sort of long spaces of not remembering things throughout the day, these very chronic feelings of numbness, a very difficult and very limited capacity to get in touch with our feelings, and often not even feeling connected to our body. And you may see also in these more severe cases, because somebody is disconnected from their body's emotional signals, a lot of the physical signals in the body can also be reduced. So, we have hunger and satiety neurochemicals, right? We've got leptin and ghrelin that actually regulate appetite. But I've often seen in individuals with CPTSD, because they have more severe forms of dissociation, they're not even connected to their physical appetite, their physical body, their body's physical limits as well. Sometimes I'll see people who are very dissociated have a great capacity to like push through pain, like in marathons or in things like that, because they can easily access this comfort of a dissociated state that they were quite familiar with. However, that's not necessarily a healthy thing, right? Like we want to be in touch with our body and able to be present and grounded. So these disconnected feelings, right? May cause somebody to not really be present in what their emotions are, but also in what signals from their body are around pain, hunger, fullness, things of that nature. And so with CPTSD individuals, you'll see that way more strongly. With individuals with fearful avoidant attachment style, you may see like very mild forms of dissociation that tend to be more spaced out and a lot less chronic. Number 6, we will often see for individuals with FA attachment style and CPTSD both, they tend to share boundary issues. A lot of times when you go through complex post-traumatic stress disorder, you will see that a way of staying safe during challenging times was to repress boundaries. Because often, if you set a boundary in an unhealthy dynamic, you were either punished severely, shamed severely, which would be a form of punishment, of course, or there could have been safety consequences. And so you learn to associate your boundaries as being things that were unsafe. So if you try to set boundaries in your adult life, you might actually have this really big fear response where your subconscious will block you because it associates your boundaries as equating to, when I set a boundary, I get punished, I get abandoned, I get shamed. I have a safety issue where somebody's going to physically maybe harm me or yell at me or frighten me. And so, as a big part of adapting to an environment like that, it is very common to have to repress your relationship to your boundaries. And it's actually something that really needs to be reconditioned, whether you have CPTSD or fearful avoidant attachment style. And in this case, you will often see boundary issues in extremes with individuals with CPTSD. And often that's actually one of the last things to go in terms of the healing journey. Like I find that individuals with CPTSD do well regulating their nervous system, reprogramming core wounds, learning their needs, a lot of these different things first, and then boundaries tend to come a little bit later. There's a very specific set of steps we can follow for healing our relationship to boundaries that starts with reprogramming our limiting beliefs about boundaries. Like these ideas that we have about boundaries will make me unsafe, boundaries will make me abandoned or punished, right? And we have to actually change those ideas so that we don't constantly see our present and future through the lens of those past experiences that we might have had. And when we can recondition that, then we can actually do some exposure work and set boundaries in small increments and start seeing results. I won't go too far down that rabbit hole right now because we still have 3 more points to cover, but you will generally see that there tends to be severe boundary issues in individuals with CPTSD. And that also may be something that individuals with fearful avoidant attachment style share. And fearful avoidance will say, no, 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 I can set boundaries. But if you set boundaries from a place of anger, and there were 10 times you didn't set boundaries first before you got angry, and if that's your pattern with boundaries, that still indicates a very strong boundary issue. More on that later. The next big piece here is that we will tend to see hypervigilance for both fearful avoidant and CPTSD individuals. We touched on that a little bit earlier. That goes hand in hand with being more in sympathetic nervous system mode a lot more frequently. But we will see individuals with CPTSD actually have that to a strong degree. And this is one of the differences where they can experience a lot of physical symptoms of stress. They may have panic attacks. They may have night sweats, nightmares, rapid heart beating, excessive sweating throughout the day, and a lot of difficulty actually relaxing and sort of slowing down and turning off. Whereas with a fearful avoidant, we won't usually see that to the same degree, if at all. Number 8, intrusive thoughts and memories. This again can be something that is more related to individuals with CPTSD, less related to fearful avoidance. We may see in individuals with CPTSD flashbacks, nightmares, or at least just intrusive memories related to past events, where we can see somebody really ruminating or thinking back about painful things in the past in a way that kind of feels out of control. Whereas fearful avoidance, that is not as common of a dynamic. And we will see number 9, chronic physical symptoms. So I find this to be one of the most interesting components of CPTSD, but we may see a series of digestive issues, chronic pain, headaches, other stress related problems. And largely, when we look into some of the research around this has a lot to do with the fact that if you are constantly in sympathetic nervous system mode, you are usually producing an excess of cortisol, which then can actually be very taxing to your adrenal system. And your adrenal system and thyroid tend to go hand in hand. So then we can start having thyroid issues. We can have gut health issues that come as a result of, adrenal challenges and inflammation in the gut can go hand in hand with that too. So we can see these things sort of get passed back and forth, but you'll see if we have excess cortisol for prolonged periods of time, because we're always in fight or flight, that the adrenals and gut go hand in hand, the adrenals and thyroid go hand in hand, the gut and thyroid go hand in hand. And our immune system function goes hand in hand with a lot of elevated cortisol for long periods of time. So, that's a conversation perhaps for your naturopathic doctor or somebody in that space. But it is very clear that if we have a lot of sympathetic nervous system mode for a prolonged period of time, it can burn us out. It can cause a lot of gut issues. And then it can just have this ripple out effect on your entire immune system and other things like your thyroid and adrenals that have an impact on other hormones. So, there can be many different impacts there. Whereas if you're avoidant attachment style, they often won't get to the chronic pain or physical symptom space in terms of CPTSD, though they may spend much more time in sympathetic nervous system than they need to. So if you see yourself really in the chronic pain or physical symptom side of things, that could be a big indicator that CPTSD may be a part of that equation as well. So if you want to do a deeper dive into CPTSD, or healing fearful avoidant attachment style, we do have in-depth courses on both that really target nervous system regulation at the root. So you can work on some of those physical components, also target a lot of the boundaries, emotional regulation, reprogramming core wounds. We do have courses you can check out for free for 7 days down below for both. And to be honest, you could probably get through both of those courses within the 7-day period. And we also have a lifetime membership available to PDS. If you want to do a very deep dive into a multitude of the courses that we have, the ongoing support literally for life, because everything will be posted there. I do 4 webinars a week. We have daily webinars with other trained coaches, facilitators, and all of that is, you can access it all down below. And there's a big promotion we have going on for that right now, where that's actually $1,000 off for a limited time. So if you want to check that out too, you're more than welcome to. But I hope this really gives you some information and insight into CPTSD versus fearful avoidant attachment style. And thank you so much for watching and for being here. If you enjoyed this channel or this video, please consider liking, sharing, hitting the thumbs up button, and or subscribing. Thank you for watching.